Hello there, my name is Michael Maynard and welcome back to Gorilla Picking. Now, what we are going to do today, folks, is a review on a very interesting lock indeed. We are going to do a review of the Rav Bariach Locxis. So, Locxis is spelt L-O-C-X-I-S. The Locxis is Rav Bariach's pretty much their flagship lock, really, when you get right down to it. And it is a competitor to the Mul-T-Lock Interactive. Now, it does have some very significant differences to the Mul-T-Lock Interactive, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But first of all, the similarities. Mul-T-Lock and Rav Bariach are kind of almost cousins. So Rav Bariach actually invented the Mul-T-Lock. It sold off the patent to the Mul-T-Lock locks years ago to ASA. But it has been making pin-and-pin locks on its own account ever since. And the Locxis, this one here, is in fact so similar to a Mul-T-Lock Interactive, which I happen to have a core of in my hand here, that the core will actually fit in there and pin up just nicely. So they are virtually identical in a lot of ways. But in quite a few ways, they are actually quite inferior to the Interactive, and that's really what I'd like to talk about today. So, first of all, let's have a look at an interactive key. Now, the Interactive has got one interactive chamber here. In this particular one, it's in position 1, sometimes it's in position 2. So we've got one interactive chamber, and then we have got 4 pin-and-pin chambers. In this case, 2, 3, 4 and 5 are all pin-and-pin. Now, the Locxis actually goes one step further than that. All the Locxis locks have 2 pin-and-pin chambers. So positions, start again. They have 2 interactive chambers in positions 1 and 2. And then the only pin-and-pin chambers that they've got are 3, 4 and 5. Now, what does that mean? Well, what that means is that only a Locxis key will work in a Locxis lock. And they've got the patent on this till 2030, so there is no Mul-T-Lock key that is going to fit a Locxis. On the other hand, it means an extra level of complexity. So you've got 2 of these interactive chambers here to go wrong, and they are a bit complex. We'll talk about that in a minute. And also, and this is a really key point, guys, we've only got 3 chambers in the lock to do the actual pinning with. Now, I want you to sit and think about that for a minute. So, if your system has got these 2 interactive chambers already set, right? You have only got 1, 2, 3 pin-and-pin chambers to actually do the bitting of the lock itself. So let's say you've got a master key system, right? And all the keys are going to have these 2 interactive things being the same. There are 4 possible outers and 5 possible inners in each of these chambers. So you've got 5 fours are 20, times 5 fours are 20, times 5 fours are 20, so that's 20 times 20 is 400, times 20 is 8,000. You have only got a key space of 8,000 possible keys that you can use in a system, which is ridiculously small. Now, Rav Bariach in their sales literature claim that there are 3 million possible key differs. Now, I am not actually sure how they get that figure, folks, and I have emailed them to ask them for confirmation. They haven't got back to me yet, which is why I'm making this video with a couple of assumptions. But there are, as far as I can make out here, 2 possible heights for the outer on the interactive chamber and 3 possible heights for the inner on the interactive chamber. So you've got 3 2s are 6 times 3 2s are 6 possible combinations there. So if we multiply that out, we have got 20 times 20 times 20, so that's our 8,000, times 6 times 6 equals 288,000. So on the face of it, we've actually only got a very, very small key space for this lock, and I would really like to know how they get that figure of 3 million. The other thing that they don't do, and this is a really, really big difference, guys, this is important. Here is a Mul-T-Lock Interactive core. Now, you will see down the side here, we have got space for 5 passive key control pins. Now, if you know anything about key control pins, this gives you a massively increased number of unique keys that we can use. Now, the Rav Bariach lock, on the other hand, here is the core for that one. They just have the holes for the main pins there, and no passive pinning at all possible in this lock. So this lock, the Interactive, has got 3 times 20 times 20 times 20 times 20 possible key combinations up the top here, multiplied by 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 for these passive pins down the side. So the key space for the Interactive is massively greater, as far as I can work out anyway, than it is for the Rav Bariach. Interesting stuff. Okay, now, next thing I want to do is talk to you about the interactive chambers and how they actually work. And this is where everything gets interesting, folks. So let's just talk about the Mul-T-Lock Interactive for a start. Now, I told you that we have got this little interactive pin right here. And what happens is that gets pushed upwards like so. You can see that getting moved there by a little pin on the bottom of the core of the lock. So the way that this actually works, this little element is floating, and you push that in like so, and there is a little knobble right here just inside there, which pushes that up. And what that in turn does is pushes this little pin, in actual fact, higher than the top of the key. Now what that does, it means that any key that doesn't have this floating interactive element is never going to be able to open the lock, because it can't push a pin higher than the key itself is. It's only this thing that can do that. And there are 3 possible bittings for that. You can have a bitting which pushes both inner and outer up the same amount. That's what this one does. You can have an innie, so the outer pushes up a certain amount and the inner pin is slightly less. And then you can have an outie, which has got a kind of a dimple on the top here, where the outer is pushed up a certain amount, like so, and the inner pin is pushed up a little bit further again. Right, well, the Locxis doesn't have that. The Locxis, the inside of the core here is absolutely dead flat. We don't have that little spring-loaded pin. So what the hell can be going on here? Well, what's going on is that the interactive elements on the key here are actually sprung loaded. Now you're going to be able to see this if I hold this up to the camera. So here is our standard pinning, here are our 2 interactive pins. You can see that this first interactive pin is a flat one, so it pushes the outer and the inner pin up the same amount. And this one here is actually a bit of an outie, and what it's got an outer segment that pushes the outer up a certain amount, and then it has got a little captive ball bearing, exactly like a biro. So if you can imagine the end of a ballpoint pen, which pushes the inner pin up even further still. Now, I am pushing those up with my finger. So you can see that my finger is flush with the bottom of the lock, and I have pushed those pins up and they are sitting proud of the top of the key. Now that's real good, because that means that it can push these pins up higher than the top of the key. But you do not need to be a genius, folks, to figure out that if these things are being pushed higher than the top of the key, then what should happen is that when you push the key into the lock, they should bang on the outside of the keyway and not go in. So there must be something a bit tricky going on. And it turns out that these little interactive elements are not just a solid piece of metal, they're actually a sandwich, right? They're a sprung-loaded sandwich. And so there is a little tiny spring inside this interactive element that pushes the top part up. So you can see that I'm pushing that down. So what happens when you insert the key into the lock is that the keyway pushes these bits down. It pushes them, so compresses them so that they're just in line with the top of the key. And then when this thing gets into position, so when it is in the right place, like so, then those little sprung-loaded things can pop up. So they're not being pushed from below by a pin, a spring-loaded pin in the bottom of the core. They're actually popping up under their own steam. Now, I think that that is a very, very poor design, folks. I think that these little things, these little spring-loaded doohickeys, I think they're going to fail. Because you think about how this has to work. In order to push the key pins and the drivers upwards, right, the spring force in this little tiny thing, which is only a matter of what, 4 or 5 mils thick, something like that, that spring there has to overcome the spring pressure from the driver springs, the top springs in the lock. So these little springs here, only what, maybe 3 mils thick, something like that, are being asked to overcome the force that these much, much, much bigger springs are exerting. Now my guess is that after a while those little springs there are going to fail before these things do, and I think probably we're going to get lockouts because of that. So if I had to pick a better system, I would say that the multi-lock system with the solid pin that gets pressed up by a little spring-loaded dimple in the bottom of the core, so in here, is a better system. Full stop, end of story. Alright, what else is better? Well, in the multi-lock, there are little catches on the edges of the inner pins that lock themselves together. Now, this is an anti-pick measure, and the poor old Rav Bariach doesn't have that. So here is one of the drivers. Let me just zoom in onto this. So that is the Rav Bariach driver, and you can see, if I just push that out a bit, you will see that there is absolutely no ridge on that inner. Now let me just grab a multi-lock one by comparison, and you'll see the difference in quality immediately. Here is the multi-lock one, and you will see that there is that little groove just there. If I can ever frame that properly, you can see that groove in the edge of that pin there. That is designed to catch on the key pins, and unfortunately the Rav Bariach just does not have that. So the pick resistance of the Rav Bariach is nowhere even close to as good as the multi-lock. This is actually a very easy lock to pick, and the next video I do on this will be a tutorial on that. Now the other thing I just wanted to show you, just in passing, the manufacturing on this is actually pretty cheap and quick. So what they've done here, the inner pin, so the inner driver, they have just, so there's a spring inside this driver. Okay, so this is the outer driver, and this little bit here is the inner driver. They have shoved the inner through the spring through the outer, and then what they've done is just squashed the top. So if you have a good look there, you'll see that that has just been crushed over. That's just been crimped to keep everything together. So pretty quick and not that great quality when you get right down to it. The other thing that I notice about these is that all the drivers are standard. So we don't have any spool pins here at all. We have just got a whole bunch of standard drivers there and a whole bunch of standard inners. So really quite easy to pick. That is a pretty normal kind of a multi-lock driver, and you guys that pick multi-locks often, you will know and love these things. That is a pretty standard spool. Almost all Interactives are spooled on the outers. It does, so we're back to the Rav Bariach pinning now. It does have an anti-bump pin, good for it. So that's what this little torpedo shaped thing is here. That is not as good as the multi-lock anti-bump system, but it's better than nothing, and I'll kind of give it a pass for that. So that is the Rav Bariach Locxis in a nutshell. Frankly, I do not rate it, and I would not buy it. I really don't know the price point on these things, and honestly, I don't really care. Okay, if I was anywhere where the Rav Bariach Locxis was being sold, I would be willing to bet my bottom dollar that the Mul-T-Lock Interactive was available as well. And if it was me, folks, I would buy the Mul-T-Lock Interactive over the Rav Bariach for all sorts of reasons. Again, not as many key differences. Cheaper construction, possibly more failure-prone construction with these little spring-loaded interactive elements here, and just generally cheaper and not as well thought out. So there you go, folks. Review on the Rav Bariach. The next video on this will be the tutorial on picking it. It's not a difficult lock to pick, guys, so stay tuned for part 2. Thanks for watching. My name's Michael Maynard. This is Gorilla Picking, and that is the Locxis. Thanks, guys.